Podcasts, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the podcast.
There are 4 lights!
Its 5-year mission to explore strange, familiar worlds, to seek out new listeners and new civilizations, to boldly go where most nerds have gone before. Join Matt and Shirley on their 5-year mission with a different guest each week as they talk about an episode of Star Trek, from the original series through Enterprise. They'll cover every episode, eventually.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to There Are 4 Lights. This week, it's just me with our guest host, Bruce Leslie from Heroes and Villains podcast. Say hi, Bruce.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here, Matt. Great to be here.
Well, yeah, it's great to have you here. Tell us all a little bit about your podcast. I know you've got the Heroes and Villains, and you've got another one that you're on, right?
Yeah, I've been doing Heroes and Villains for just a shade over 2 years now, and it's a pretty straightforward concept to understand. I just take one character, almost always from comic books. There have been just a couple times I've ventured out of that a little bit, but for the most part, I just take a comic book character, talk about them top to bottom, inside out, creation, and have a little bit of fun with the influences, characters that influence that character and vice versa near the end of the show. I aim for about an hour on each episode, but to be honest, it's usually about an hour and a half plus on most of them. And I try to have like a nice rotation of guests. Of course, you've been kind enough to be on there a handful of times yourself, Matt, and I appreciate that. And And the other podcast I'm a part of is called Hero Movie Podcast. And the name says it all. We take one movie each week, and we just kind of give our comments on what we think about that movie. And, of course, it's exclusively comic book influenced movies. The source material that the movies are adapted from are always comic books, mostly superhero stuff. But we have done a couple of other things that were a little bit different, like Scott Pilgrim vs. the World and the Sin City sequel that came out not too long ago. So we're trying to get a sort of slogging through the winter months until it starts getting real busy the first weekend of May, which is coming up quick, and we get Age of Ultron. But you can find links to all that at bruceleslie.com. Real easy. It's just my Tumblr page is what it directs you to, and it's got links to everything that I dabble in there.
Well, cool. Yeah, so definitely check those out. There are some really good episodes of Heroes and Villains. There's 3 of them I can think of that I'm on, and those are the best.
Yes, absolutely.
No, honestly, you've had some really good guests. I've really enjoyed listening to your podcast. So,
and I got to meet one of your favorites just about 2 weeks ago. I got to meet Patrick Warburton, got to shake his hand, get his autograph, all that sort of thing in Seattle. So I thought about you the whole time I was talking to him.
Right on. Now I'm very jealous. Man, that would be awesome.
Yeah,
I love
super nice guy, man. Maybe he'll come to Indie PopCon or something like that in the future.
That would be fantastic. I'd be happy about that. All right, well, let's get into what they are calling Episode 3 of the original series of Star Trek, Charlie X.
Yes.
It was brought to my attention before we started recording the podcast at all that there is some argument over the order, and this is technically not the 3rd episode, and technically what we watched, what you guys listened to last week was not the 2nd episode. We listened, or what did we talk about last week? Good night. Man Trap. Man Trap was what we talked about last week. So technically there was a 2nd pilot called, man, I should have this information in front of me. I'm really on top of it. I got everything ready for Charlie X. Anyway, there was a 2nd pilot after The Cage was lukewarmly received.
Yes.
And the Where No Man Has Gone Before was done as a 2nd pilot. So technically it's the 1st episode, but still the 2nd, and that would make this the 4th episode in that kind of run. But Where No Man Has Gone Before actually comes 4th on Netflix, and we're going to go with Netflix is right in this case.
I agree. You got to do something
really
like that.
Really long explanation for just a little bit of information, but that's all right because we like to be overly thorough. So, Bruce, you want to give us a little bit of the plot summary? Go, front to back, and just talk about what the story was about.
Well, our story opens up with a smaller Federation ship beaming aboard the Enterprise, and they've got this teenage boy that was found as the only human survivor from I guess an Earth-based spaceship that had crashed on this distant planet. and they thought, the entire passengers aboard the ship had died. But it turns out this one fella, I'm guessing he's supposed to be about 16, 17 by the look of him. I'm not sure if they actually mention his age. But it's a big mystery how this person who was a small child when the plane crashed managed to survive without any adults to raise him, how he was able to fend for himself, because they said several times that the food concentrates on the ship would only last about a year and a half. And here we are, let's say 12 years later, and the kid still seems to be alive and kicking. And the small ship really is eager to get rid of this guy. They can't wait to turn him over to the Enterprise, which is going closer to an Earth colony. I think it's Earth Colony 10, and they can drop Charlie off there. His name's simply Charlie. They don't know his last name, and I guess that's where the title gets Charlie X. But I don't think they ever call him that.
They call him Mr. Evans. They keep because he wants to understand why Kirk keeps calling him Mr. Evans.
Oh, okay. I did not realize that. But yes, so Charlie is there with the Enterprise. The other ship leaves, and he's just this guy with no social skills. I mean, it's awkward enough being a teenager, but on top of that, he hasn't been socialized around other humans, so he has a tough time, and he immediately gets a crush on, like, the first lady that he sees when he gets on board the Enterprise. It's like he's never seen a girl before. And I think he actually says, "Are you a girl?" or something like that, because he's not certain. So he gets obsessed with her. Some small little tiny things happen that are unusual on the ship. But things start to come to a head when he sort of smacks her on the bottom. And I do not remember the name of it. Was it a Yeoman? Anyway, I don't remember the name of this, I would say close to 30-year-old blonde lady that he's attracted to there. Smacks her on the backside, and of course she doesn't appreciate that, so she goes to Kirk to talk to him. Meanwhile, I think Bones and Spock have already told him that because he's the captain, he's basically the stepdad during this mission. And the longer Charlie's on the ship, the more strange things start to happen. The small ship that dropped him off with the Enterprise, it just basically disintegrates and the crew disappears shortly after dropping him off. He plays some very bizarre card tricks to try to impress this older lady. She tries to introduce him to a young lady closer to his age, and he's really rude to her. And then eventually it comes out what we sort of suspected from the get-go, that he does have some kind of, I would say, psionic powers, and he's this incredibly powerful individual. Spock had sort of foreshadowed earlier in the episode because he was researching the race that were sort of a legend that used to live on this planet, thought to long be extinct, called the Phasians, which was sort of a mystical, mysterious race. But it starts to come around that somehow he's gotten this Phasian power while he was on the planet. He essentially takes the whole Enterprise hostage, determined to get to Earth Colony 10, where he can use his power to basically do whatever he wants anytime. And there's this whole struggle, with Bones, Spock, and Kirk primarily. How are we going to stop this all-powerful, almighty teenager here? So, it comes down onto Kirk's shoulders, and he really has to come up with a plan to take him. And if it comes down to it, Kirk's going to confront him head on. But they come up with a nice plan that the Enterprise is so complicated, much more complicated than the smaller ship that delivered Charlie, that if he really wants to control the whole of the Enterprise with his psionic powers, then it's going to take everything he's got, and he can't really challenge the crew. So just as this little plan of Kirk starts to come to a head, and they have the ability perhaps to capture him, then the mysterious Phasians, these green translucent floating heads, I guess is the best way to describe them, they show up on the Enterprise and basically demand to take Charlie back because he can't be left around humanity. They wanted to care for him, but his adolescent shortcomings just make it not a practical choice to let him go back with the humans, and they take him off, and then we get the credits to our episode.
Yep, absolutely. That's the basics of the episode. The yeoman in question is Yeoman Rand, and she actually is somewhat important in this season, and I think the next season, if I remember correctly from what I've heard.
Yeah.
Again, this is my first run through the original series ever. I've not watched anything but the movies, so this is new to me.
You're up for a lot of highs and lows there.
Yeah, I know that, and I know there are some good ones coming, and I know that I'm going to enjoy those, but I also know there's some terrible ones coming. This one's pretty good. I actually liked it.
Yes, it's one of the more memorable ones. Growing up, I hadn't necessarily seen a lot of the original series. You know, you catch a rerun here and there, but it's before you would do something like buy this on DVD or before anything even remotely close to Netflix was around. So what I got was this book of short stories called the Star Trek Reader, which basically novelized the entire first run of the original series, you know, the first 3 seasons, I guess it was. So each story was essentially an episode that had been novelized, I guess, short story-ized, since it's not exactly novelized. And I remember reading this, and this one was one that really sticks out in your mind when you're, let's say you're a 12, 13-year-old kid reading this. You start to really wish that you were Charlie sometimes. You kind of fantasize about that power.
Yeah. Yeah, Yeoman Rand is there, and we do see, I think this is the first instance of 3-dimensional chess that we've seen in Star Trek, which makes it really early on. I think that's kind of awesome.
Yeah.
I still don't know how to play the game, but I'm, all kinds of excited about learning how to do that. But I think it's solid. I think there's enough allegory to normal teenage angst and not understanding what to do, and Kirk gives it a good go to be a father, but there's only so much you can do when somebody has limitless power and realizes you have really little hold over him. So
yes, and it has a real nice Twilight Zone feel to it, because of course there's sort of a famous Twilight Zone episode about a young boy that terrorizes the town he lives in, and they adapted that into that Twilight Zone movie of the early 80s, I guess it would have been. So that's the kind of comparison that's in my mind, because Shatner had that Twilight Zone connection, of course, so I couldn't help but go there when I'm watching this to think of this as more of a, maybe one of the earliest incidences of space horror.
Yeah. And there is some some tries from Kirk to kind of pass off Charlie on somebody else.
Yes.
Which I'm not sure. I got some vibes from this that I got from Picard when it came to Wesley.
Oh,
like there
wow.
was some interactions there where Picard was trying to be a mentor but didn't really want to do it and didn't want a kid around and passed it off to Riker. And I saw some similarities there between Kirk and Charlie that I like. I think I like drawing that. I think if they were trying to call back to that earlier, the earlier episodes, and not be too weird about it, because Charlie's a little weird, really weird at points.
Very weird.
So, I mean, I think if they were trying to do that, that's great. But this definitely goes into a very different. Oh well, I guess it doesn't. I just guess Wesley's. A little spoiler alert, Wesley eventually gets limitless power and goes off with the Traveler, I think his name is.
Yeah,
so.
I guess I'm going to have to, next time I see Will Wheaton at a con, I'm going to have to hope I get a chance to ask a question, because now I want to know if he was inspired by Charlie X when he was playing Wesley.
Huh, well, I didn't even think about that until now. So Charlie does a bunch of stuff in this. He melts some chess pieces. He turns meatloaf into turkeys.
Yeah, the meatloaf into turkeys was kind of one of the more benign things that he did. I guess they were celebrating Thanksgiving. I don't know when this episode was released, but
it was released September 15th.
So a little early for the Thanksgiving special, but that was kind of interesting. But then he makes people disappear, and that's when it starts to get a little darker. Yeah. And then I think he turns Yeoman Rand into a lizard, right?
He turns Yeoman Rand's friend, Yeoman Tina.
Okay, it's the young girl that he turns into the lizard. Okay.
Yeah, he turns her into a lizard, which that's just weird. But yeah, Charlie is sufficiently. The actor did a very good job of being sufficiently creepy and weird, and made me believe it quite a bit. It was. I mean, there's some. And occasionally in these original series episodes you get some subpar acting, but this one was decent.
And above and beyond the acting, I just want to give credit where credit's due, but whoever the casting director was, they really picked the right kid to play Charlie. I mean, even acting aside, he just had kind of a creepy look to him. I mean, he had a real kind of melon head where the top part of his head just seemed too big for his chin, sort of an inverted pear-shaped head that almost made you think this is like what a comic book or sci-fi character with an oversized brain and mental powers would look like, just because he had that sort of, that prominent cranial cavity there on top of his chin.
Yeah, like the Tick villain, the Lobe.
Exactly. That same kind of thought there.
The actor playing Charlie was Robert Walker Jr., who is still alive, at the ripe old age of 74. But he was in a couple other movies, nothing huge. He was except Easy Rider. He was in Easy Rider. But he didn't go on to do anything huge.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of here and there, and
once again, he had that quirky look, so he may not have been embraced by the Hollywood mainstream.
Yeah, this is true. I take it back. He was in Son of Blob. That's a big one. And honestly, for those people that like those kinds of movies, that probably is a really big one. So
yeah, that's one that I haven't seen though. So I may have to look for Charlie X in that if I ever get around to watching it.
Oh yeah, definitely. And then we had a couple other people, but nobody really of note in this one doing any kind of guest stars. And we definitely do see Yeoman Rand come back again and again because she's she's like a secondary cast member in this first series. So we'll get to see her again.
Yes.
In her weird last episode, she was bringing food to people. Which was just kind of odd. I don't remember that happening in any of the Next Generation episodes with anybody. No. So maybe that was something they dropped. But I feel like Yeoman Rand almost needs a part in all of the Star Trek movies, and she deserved it. But I guess they cut her out. So
yeah, and who knows what happened between the wrap up of the series and the filming of the movies? I mean, maybe it was her decision as much as anyone else's.
Yeah, definitely. We only had really kind of one strange race there, the Thasian, which was this bodiless head in their weird light spaceship. And
listening to the or watching the show, listening to the guys talk, I couldn't quite tell, is it TH or PH? Are they Thasian or Phasian? I may have
they're Thasian with a TH.
Okay, because I think I got that wrong. I had phasers on the mind, so I think I may have called them the wrong thing in my rundown. But a race that we hadn't seen before, and I don't think they really come back a whole lot after, do they?
Not that I can think of.
I don't remember them from Next Generation or anything like that. They may have showed up in the original series again.
Well, and there are so many, there are so many aliens and so many episodes. I can't say for sure, but I don't remember it coming up again. Although I did read that there's a fan-made mini-series called Star Trek of Gods and Men that Charlie Evans is an adult in and comes back to kind of star in, or the character comes back and kind of stars.
I thought you were going to tell me they got Robert Walker Jr. to come back and do it.
No, that would be kind of awesome. I kind of want to find pictures of an older Robert Walker Jr. just to see how giant his head is now. So,
well, if I ever get the budget and can find some actor friends, you've inspired me to do Charlie X versus Wesley Crusher and some kind of Alien versus Predator type fan film.
Oh yeah, definitely. So, was there anything that stuck out to you that seemed a little weird, or that seemed a little extraordinary? The only thing I can really think of is when he made people disappear. It was smooth enough. I mean, it wasn't grade A material for today, but it was still pretty good.
I loved the red karate outfits that they wore, and I loved how obvious it was that even at the young age Shatner was at this point in time, he was sucking in the whole time because he was the only person who had to be shirtless in that scene. And you can kind of, there's a look when an abdominal area is naturally toned, and then there's a look when people are really sucking it in. That's kind of different. You could tell that Shatner had to wait till they called cut to XL when he was filming those. But I was impressed with how smooth Shatner moves. Sometimes I forget that he wasn't a bad physical actor. I mean, some of those judo tumbles and falls and things, he looked like he was comfortable tumbling and not the way that would look if I tried to do it.
Yeah, and he did like to take his shirt off. I did, even though he was sucking it in. He's the only person with his shirt off, and I guess if you're the captain of the ship, you can do whatever you want. But that seemed a little odd.
But I need to go online and try to get one of those red karate gis from Starfleet. I'm sure that somebody makes them and sells them. It's just a short bathrobe.
And they weren't sweatpants; they were like spandex.
Yeah.
The pants that they were wearing.
I didn't even know
you got to get that too, man.
I didn't know spandex was that easy to come by back in the '60s, but apparently some folks at Paramount could do it.
Well, if you live in space, all space wears spandex. If I've learned anything.
I picture, like, whenever you hear the behind the scenes, they were actually made out of wool and they were just really, really tight or something like that. Because all the stories are horrible about how uncomfortable those costumes were.
I can only imagine, because that did not look at all fun. But, they were good sports, and, the actor they had playing Crewman Sam or whatever, he seemed to be having a good time and getting killed or whatever. So, I guess I can't argue too much about that. I did like that this was the first appearance of Kirk's green shirt.
Oh, yes, yes.
So we'll get to see that a little later. It is his weird green, wear it when he's off duty kind of thing.
His leisure shirt. I don't know what else to call it.
Yeah. It looks a little sleazy, honestly. It has this like creepy guy.
There's a part of me that thinks that they may have gotten that from Shatner's own wardrobe.
I can just see him on the set. Hey, Bill, we like the shirt you're wearing. Can we slap the Star Trek symbol on that and just go?
And we get to see Yeoman Rand's very impractical, like, one-shouldered sleepwear, because I would think if you're tossing and turning a little bit in your sleep, that wouldn't be a great design. At least I assume it was sleepwear. Maybe it's just her evening garb before she puts on her pajamas.
Yeah, I do like that they try and make chess so, like, futuristic and space-like, but then they turn around and play cards, which that threw me off a little bit.
Yes.
I mean, if you're going to work so hard to make a 3D chessboard, and I don't even know if they have rules for it at this point, but, like, they clearly put work and effort into that, and then they're like, and these guys are playing cards, and Spock can play a weird-looking ukulele.
And I like that ukulele thing. It looked like it could have turned into a weapon. I know it's supposed to be a Vulcan lute or something like that, but it almost looked more like a Klingon design to me, because it looked like you could defend yourself with it pretty easily.
Oh yeah, and there was some weird smiling from Spock in that scene too. Like there was some emotions there. So we talked about last episode. Uhura like straight up hits on Spock, like. Really hard, and there was a little bit of that here too.
And rewatching that gives me a little more appreciation for the J.J. Abrams movies, because that seemed to me like such a departure from what I was used to from the original cast of Star Trek. But now looking at this very early material, it's actually pretty honest to that similar age in their life and to how they probably felt towards each other in this first season. So I got to say, I've got to hand it to Abrams there, because he knew the source material a little bit better than I did.
Yeah, clearly. And, I found that a little, not off-putting, but it was surprising when I watched the Abrams stuff. And now, you're right, it clearly has at least some history in canon. So, Abrams was on top of what he was doing.
Yep.
Which makes me feel a little bit better. If we could take the lens flares out of his movies, I think they'd be way better.
I enjoyed those two movies. I know some people do, some people don't, but I didn't have problems with them. I was ready to go back to, whatever excuse they had to use to get back to the original crew. I definitely didn't want to see more next-gen movies at this point, so it was interesting.
I give it a lot of crap. The lens flares are the things that bother me the most. The rest of it is pretty solid. I mean, it's not the best movies ever, but they're pretty good.
I've got a solution for you, man. Just wear polarized sunglasses when you watch it, and I think it takes some of the flares out. I don't know. I'm guessing.
Not the worst idea. They were good, and I would say they're definitely better than Star Trek V, where they meet God.
Yes.
And Spock nerve pinches a horse, and Uhura does a fan dance. That one's pretty terrible.
To be honest, I really didn't. I don't think I've had multiple viewings of any of the original cast since 4. I like 4 when they go back and deal with the wells and things, and then after that, I kind of tuned out until the TNG kind of movie started hitting.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, we got to see Wrath of Khan on the big screen. And the film was not the greatest. I mean, it was old, but other than that, like, it was smooth and beautiful, and I really enjoy Wrath of Khan.
Yeah.
I think it's a solid movie. So, and then when you find out that because the first one flopped so bad that they essentially did Wrath of Khan on a shoestring budget, and a lot of the stuff that they had was just props they had laying around that they flipped upside down so it looked more impressive.
Well, I know
it's kind of
I saw Wrath of Khan as a kid, and I had to sleep with earplugs in for a couple of months afterwards because I was so scared of that brain weevil or whatever that they put in the guy's ear.
Oh.
But
I don't blame you.
But with this movie, I was kind of this episode, I was kind of mentioning a little bit before, like that Twilight Zone feel, that little bit almost more of a, it's not outright horror, but a little bit of a psychological horror, and it has the mystical Stephen King-like elements. Did you find that effective? I mean, is that your cup of tea, or did you feel like that strayed too much from what you're used to with the show? I kind of liked it.
With Star Trek, I find that when the writing is well done, and I think it is in this episode, that they can tell a horror aspect of a story in any episode as long as they treat it well. And this one, it was treated well. The actor, the guy playing the Robert Walker Jr., he really did it well. He did that thing with his eyes, and he stared at people, and it was intense, and it was just enough to be creepy, but it wasn't so much that it was comical or over the top. He was genuinely creepy. So I think the acting and the writing really, really hit home on this one and did a good job what they were trying to do.
Yes, and I thought that part was effective. I liked it. It makes it stand out and not be just another Star Trek episode. I was a little, I don't know if disappointed's the right word, but I wish it had ended just a little bit differently. I don't like it that the Thasians came in and saved the day, because I felt like the crew was ready to solve the problem themselves. I would have probably enjoyed it more if the crew had caught him and sedated him, and then the Thasians came and demanded that he be turned over to them or something along those lines. I wanted to see the crew win on their own wits before the Thasians came in, and I felt like that it was a little too Deus Ex Machina to have them come in at the time they did.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, except then the choice Kirk makes to say that Charlie should be with his own kind, and kind of puts himself out there, even knowing how dangerous he is. It puts firmly the foot down on what Star Trek and what Kirk is all about. Like, he's about protecting those that are scared and weak. Even someone who's way more powerful than he is, he's willing to take that step for that.
Yes.
So I agree. It was very Deus Ex Machina, but there was some more development that we got to see there because of it. So
and they were limited to the time. It's not like a movie where your running time has some variability. They had to be pretty strict there. So I guess they had to get to that point, or else they were going to have to cut something out. So, I don't want them to cut out Uhura singing that song, I suppose. So they had to do what they had to do.
And with that, we'll get into our reoccurring items, which we don't have a whole lot of, but we got no bones being a doctor, not anything else. There were none of that. Kirk got none of the ladies, not one.
You're right.
There was a moment where Spock was overly logical. I forget what it was, but it stood out, and I meant to note it, but I was cooking at the time, so I kind of...
To be so early in the series, too, they almost... tried to be a little self-aware, because Spock is the only one who believes in the Thasians, which seemed like a ghost story to Bones. So I thought they kind of reversed those roles there a little bit. I like that.
Yeah, a little bit. I know when Spock was being logical. It was when they were playing chess. He said something about how Kirk being illogical was to his benefit sometimes, which I think is building on that on what comes later in the episode, and being illogical and trying to save Charlie when it's clearly safer for Charlie to be taken.
Yes.
But there was maybe 2 deaths. we see Yeoman Rand come back after she disappears, but we don't see the crewman come back. He just kind of disappears. So we're going to call that one a red shirt death, and we're going to knock that up.
And what about the pablum colored shirts on that entire crew on that ship that delivered Charlie? I mean, they all suffered too.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. I don't know. They said how many members of that crew there were. We'll have to note that. But Joe suggested that we keep a running total in our show notes, so I'm going to do that. So there were definitely, I'm going to call it 2 actual crew member deaths, and 1 turned into a lizard. So, and then surprisingly, Uhura did something other than answer the phone. She did some singing, and that wasn't half bad. So I wasn't all that disappointed.
Right.
Overall, what did you think? If you give it a 1 out of 5 stars,
I'm going to give it about a 3.5. I'm going to give it somewhere in that area between 3 and 4. I mean, it's not going to be one of the one of the flagship episodes, but it does some things. It takes a few risks. It's sort of a concept episode where they deal with things that don't get dealt with a lot on Star Trek, and for that I give it more than a 3, but I don't know if I go a full-on 4 for it.
Fair enough. I think I'm right there with you. This is definitely a good episode, but it's not an episode that I liked well enough to come back and watch over and over again. And there are some of those that I will come back, and I know I'll come back and watch them over and over and over again because they're just that much fun. But this one's solid. If you said you can watch one episode of Star Trek and it's going to be Charlie X, I wouldn't be the most disappointed ever.
Oh yeah.
So I'd give it a good solid 3.5 as well. I think there's some good stuff here. So Bruce, let's talk about where we can find you exactly. Where are all your links? Where can we find you on iTunes? Where's your secret lair? What do you got?
Well, Heroes and Villains podcast on iTunes and Stitcher and all the various podcatching devices. Hero Movie Podcast on all the same places. Heroes and Villains, Hero Movie Podcast, the articles I write for Channel Superhero. You can find links to all of that at bruceleslie.com. That's just kind of the one-stop place where you can go. And it doesn't have a whole lot there, but it has links to everything else. So it's just a nice aggregator for the various things I'm involved in. And then I every now and then if I do a guest appearance like this one, I'll go ahead and pop a link to that up on there and things like that. So that's where if anyone has absolutely nothing better going on in their life, they can go see what I'm up to.
Yeah, and now, even though we're recording this now, this will be released way in the future. So looking at the past of the current future, any episodes of Heroes and Villains that you have coming up that you kind of like or that just came out that stand out to you?
I think the Captain America episode was a good one. It's one that's on the long side, but it's one of the few truly A-list characters I've ever covered on the show because I like to do characters that are a little more niche, I guess. But the Captain America episode was great. It was sort of a birthday episode for a friend of ours, Dan Ritchie, and he was on there. It's his favorite character. So that was a fun one. And also got to dive into independent comics and talk a little bit about Christian Walker from Powers. Just sort of popped into my head because of the PlayStation Network series that came out back in the spring. So I got someone who was a big fan of Brian Michael Bendis' comics to come on and talk about Christian Walker and Powers with me. So those are a couple people may want to check out.
Well, cool. Yeah. And definitely there will be by the time this comes out, there will be an episode about Iceman out that I'll be on.
Yes.
And I've got a couple other episodes. You should definitely listen to The Tick because The Tick is awesome, and so is Atomic Robo.
Yeah.
And Onslaught. Honestly, I liked all three of the characters I grabbed, so all three of those are great episodes.
Yeah, I think out of those three, I liked all three, but Onslaught was a lot of fun because we really got to talk about everything in the Marvel Universe on Onslaught.
Yeah, well, Onslaught was weird like that. He was just kind of all over the place. I loved it.
I think that was the one I had the most fun out of those first three that you were on.
Yeah, I had a blast. So anywhere special we can see you coming up or in the past now?
Just go to bruceleslie.com. Folks can follow me on Twitter at HV Podcast, the letter H, the letter V Podcast, and anything that does happen to pop up, I'll share it with the world there. I don't really have a whole lot of excitement planned for this fall, but maybe next summer I'll have some cons that I'm going to be at or something I can share with the world.
Cool. We will talk to you guys real soon.
And that'll do us tonight for
There Are Four Lights.
Remember, you can email us at therearefourlightspodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook at facebook.com/nerdsdomain, on Twitter at nerdsdomain, or over at our site, nerdsdom.com. Be sure to sign up for the newsletter while you're there. You can head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating. A big thanks to 5 Year Mission for their music. You can find them at 5yearmission.net. Don't forget you can support us at patreon.com/nerdsdomain. And check out our shirts at /loot.